I will stand for her," the rancher who defended his Apache neighbor in court. The soft morning light touched the rolling hills and the dusty paths that crisscrossed the ranch. On one of these paths, John Miller, a strong and determined man in his early 40s, was already at work. His hands were rough from years of handling cattle, fixing fences, and tending the land that his family had cared for generations. John loved the quiet life his ranch offered. The work was hard, yes, but it gave him freedom. Every morning, as he watched the sun rise over the mountains, he felt a sense of peace that city life could never give him. John's ranch was not just land, it was a story. Each tree, each fence post, and each patch of grass had a memory attached to it. He remembered the day he had helped his father mend the broken fence after a storm, the day he had taught his little sister how to ride a horse without falling, and the day he had buried his first calf after it had died unexpectedly. These memories were simple, but they formed the foundation of John's love for the land and the life he had chosen. Not far from John's ranch lived Maria Yazzie, a kind-hearted Apache woman with a quiet strength. Her family had lived in the area for generations, and they were respected by those who knew them. Maria was known for her generosity and her deep connection to the land. She would often share vegetables from her garden with neighbors or help anyone in need without expecting anything in return. Despite the differences in their backgrounds, John and Maria had formed a strong bond over the years. Their friendship was built on trust, respect, and shared experiences on the rugged Arizona terrain. John first met Maria many years ago when he was still a young man learning the ropes of ranch life. A herd of cattle had wandered onto her property, and instead of getting angry, Maria had calmly guided them back to John's land. From that moment, a friendship began. They would often help each other with chores, fixing fences, mending tools, and sometimes just sharing a meal. Over time, their bond grew stronger. John admired Maria's courage and her quiet wisdom, and Maria respected John's honesty and hard work. Life on the ranch was not always easy. The Arizona desert was beautiful, but it could also be unforgiving. Summers were hot, and winters could be harsh and cold. Water was always a precious resource, and every drop had to be used wisely. John had learned to read the land like a book, understanding where the streams flowed, which fields would grow the best grass, and how to take care of the cattle so that none suffered. Maria, too, had this knowledge. She understood the desert's rhythms and respected its power. Together, their skills complemented each other, and their friendship was strengthened by this shared understanding of the land. On a quiet morning, John often started his day by walking around the ranch, checking on the fences, the cattle, and the small orchard he had planted years ago. He enjoyed these moments of solitude, but he also liked to see Maria working on her land nearby. Sometimes they would wave at each other from a distance, and other times they would meet at the small creek that ran between their properties. At the creek they would talk about everything: the weather, the animals, the health of the land, and the small joys and struggles of daily life. These conversations were simple, but they were meaningful. They reminded John that life was about more than just work. It was about connection, friendship, and respect for those around him. Despite the beauty and simplicity of ranch life, John knew that the world outside his land was changing. There were new people moving into the area, new companies trying to buy land, and new rules being made that sometimes did not consider the people who had lived there for generations. John sometimes worried about how these changes might affect Maria and her family. He knew that she cared deeply about her land and her heritage, and he wanted to protect that, just as he protected his own ranch. This concern, however, did not disturb the calm mornings, the laughter they shared when a calf escaped, or the quiet satisfaction of a day's work well done. For now, life was peaceful, and that peace was something John cherished deeply. One day, as John was repairing a fence near the edge of his property, Maria came walking down the dusty path with a small basket of freshly picked vegetables. She smiled warmly at him and said, "Good morning, John. I thought you might like some of these for breakfast." John smiled back, grateful for the gesture. "Thank you, Maria. You always know how to make a morning better," he replied. They talked for a while, watching the cattle graze in the distance, sharing stories about the animals and the land. These moments, though simple, were precious to both of them. They were reminders of the strength of their friendship and the beauty of the life they shared in the desert. As the day went on, John reflected on his friendship with Maria. He thought about the times they had helped each other through difficult moments, the days when a storm had damaged the fence, the nights when a calf had gone missing, and the moments when one of them had simply needed someone to talk to. Their bond was not just about work, it was about trust, loyalty, and standing by each other no matter what. John realized that true friendship, like the land he cared for, required patience, effort, and respect. And Maria had always been there, just as he had always been there for her. Evenings on the ranch were calm and beautiful. The sky would turn shades of red and purple, the cattle would settle down, and the desert would grow quiet. John often sat on the porch of his small wooden house, watching the sunset and thinking about the day. Sometimes, Maria would join him, bringing a cup of tea or a loaf of bread she had baked. They would sit together in comfortable silence, enjoying the simple pleasures of life, the sound of the wind through the trees, the smell of the earth after a day's work, and the quiet companionship that only years of shared experiences could bring. These evenings were a reminder that, even in a world full of challenges, there was still beauty, kindness, and friendship to be found. Life, however, was not only about calm mornings and quiet evenings. John knew that there were challenges ahead, both for himself and for Maria. The land they loved was valuable, and not everyone respected the people who lived on it. There were rumors of disputes, legal issues, and new rules that could threaten the peace they had worked so hard to maintain. But John was determined to face these challenges with courage and integrity. He knew that if anyone tried to harm Maria or take advantage of her, he would stand by her. It was not just about friendship, it was about justice, fairness, and doing what was right. And John had always believed that a person's character was measured by how they treated others, especially in times of difficulty. As the stars began to appear in the night sky, John felt a sense of purpose. He loved his ranch, his work, and the land he had inherited, but he also knew that life was bigger than himself. It was about community, friendship, and standing up for those who could not stand alone. And in Maria, he had found not only a friend but a neighbor whose courage, kindness, and strength inspired him every day. He knew that, no matter what challenges lay ahead, their bond would help them face anything together. The quiet desert night wrapped around the ranch, bringing a sense of calm and hope. John looked at the stars and thought about the future, about the work still to be done, and about the friendship that had grown stronger with every passing year. In that moment, he felt ready for anything. He knew that the land, the animals, and his neighbor Maria would always be worth protecting. And deep inside, he made a silent promise that he would always stand for what was right, no matter the cost, and that he would always stand for his friend. Life on the ranch had always been peaceful, but John Miller began to notice that something was changing in the small community around him. At first, it was small things. A few new faces moving into the area, new construction trucks passing by the dirt roads, and more people talking about land deals and business opportunities. John was used to the quiet life of ranching, where the days were filled with hard work, cattle, fences, and the rhythm of nature. But now, whispers of disputes and complaints were reaching his ears, and much of it seemed to involve his friend, Maria Yazzie. It started one morning when John rode over to Maria's property to check on her well-being, as he often did. He noticed a few strangers walking near her boundary lines, looking around as if they owned the land. Maria was sitting on her porch, her hands folded in her lap, her face showing a hint of worry that John had not seen before. "Good morning, John," she said softly, but her voice carried a tension that made John uneasy. He dismounted his horse and approached her. "Maria, are you okay?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "It's this company," Maria said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They say I blocked a road that runs through my property. They claim I didn't follow some rules, and now they want me to pay fines and give up part of my land." John felt a surge of anger. He had known Maria to be honest and hardworking, a woman who respected the land and her neighbors. She would never deliberately break rules or take advantage of anyone. And yet here was a company, some distant organization with lawyers and papers, threatening her livelihood. John could see how stressed Maria was. Her hands trembled slightly as she set down a basket of fresh vegetables, and her eyes, usually bright and calm, seemed shadowed with worry. He took a deep breath. "Maria, I'll help you," he said firmly. "We'll figure this out together." Maria gave a small, grateful smile, but John could tell she was still scared. "I don't even know where to start, John," she admitted. "The law is so complicated and I don't have the money for lawyers. I feel like I'm standing alone." John thought about it for a moment. He knew that legal battles were never easy, especially for someone like Maria, who had no experience with lawyers or court systems. But he also knew that he couldn't just sit back and watch an injustice happen. "You're not alone, Maria," he said. "I'll be right there with you. We'll face this together step by step. I promise." Over the next few days, John began researching the situation. He spent hours at the local library, reading books and pamphlets about land laws, property rights, and local regulations. He even went to the county office to speak with clerks and officials, asking polite but firm questions about the claims the company was making. He wanted to understand every detail, every rule, every possible way to protect Maria. And as he dug deeper, he realized how complicated and unfair the system could be. Rules that were meant to protect people like Maria often worked against them because of lack of knowledge, resources, or simply prejudice. Maria, meanwhile, tried to keep up with the daily chores on her property. She tended her small orchard, fed her animals, and made sure the fences were strong. But the stress weighed on her. Every knock on the door made her heart race. Every letter from the company made her anxious, and every stranger she saw near her land made her feel uneasy. She confided in John, telling him how lonely and frightened she felt. John listened patiently, offering words of encouragement and practical advice. He reminded her of her strength, her knowledge of the land, and the support of the community members who had always respected her. Despite their efforts to remain calm, tension in the town began to rise. Rumors spread quickly, as they often do in small communities. Some people whispered that Maria must have done something wrong, siding with the company's story without knowing the facts. Others quietly expressed admiration for John, recognizing that he was standing up for a neighbor in need. John tried to ignore the gossip, focusing on the facts and the truth of Maria's situation. He knew that the opinions of the uninformed should not shake his determination to defend what was right. One afternoon, John and Maria received a formal notice from the company. The letter was long, full of legal language and technical terms, but the message was clear. Maria had to appear in court and face serious charges regarding her land. She could lose not only the disputed area, but also face penalties that would affect her livelihood. Maria's hands shook as she held the letter, and John placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We can do this, Maria," he said. "I'll be with you every step of the way. We'll prepare for court, and we'll make sure your voice is heard." Maria nodded, tears in her eyes, feeling both fear and relief. Fear, because she knew the court could be intimidating, especially for someone like her who had little experience with legal matters. Relief, because she realized she wasn't facing this challenge alone. John's presence gave her strength. They spent the next days gathering information, talking to neighbors, and collecting documents that showed Maria's rightful ownership of the land. John also reached out to other people in the community who knew Maria and her family well. Many agreed to speak on her behalf if needed, sharing stories about her honesty, her hard work, and the care she had shown for the land over the years. Slowly but surely, John and Maria began to feel more prepared. Even as they worked, John noticed a deeper change in Maria. The fear that had weighed heavily on her began to be replaced with determination. She started asking questions about the legal process, wanting to understand every step. She began to speak more confidently when discussing her land and her rights. John was proud of her. He realized that standing up to fear was not just about facing the outside world. It was also about finding courage within oneself. Meanwhile, the community continued to react in various ways. Some people quietly offered support, bringing food or helping with chores. Others, influenced by rumors or fear of conflict, avoided getting involved. John understood that this was natural in small towns. Not everyone would take a stand, and some would prefer to stay neutral. But he also knew that the truth mattered more than popular opinion, and that justice could not be measured by how many people supported them at first. The days leading up to the court hearing were filled with preparation. John and Maria went through the documents repeatedly, rehearsed their points, and made sure everything was in order. They even visited the site of the alleged violations, taking photos and notes to present as evidence. John taught Maria how to calmly explain the situation to officials, how to answer questions truthfully, and how to maintain confidence even under pressure. He reminded her that honesty, respect, and knowledge were their strongest tools. The night before the court date, John and Maria sat together outside, watching the sun set over the desert. The sky glowed in shades of pink and gold, and the wind carried the familiar scent of dry grass and earth. Maria spoke quietly. "I'm scared, John. What if I can't do this? What if they take my land?" John looked at her, his eyes steady and reassuring. "Maria, you've been taking care of this land all your life. You know it better than anyone else. And you're not alone. We've prepared, we have witnesses, and we have the truth on our side. No matter what happens, I will stand with you. That is something I promise today and always." Maria took a deep breath, feeling a sense of calm she hadn't felt in days. She realized that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was acting despite fear, knowing that someone would stand with you. And she knew that John's support was unwavering. That night, as they both slept under the quiet desert sky, the stars twinkling like distant lamps, they knew that the next day would be difficult. But they also knew that they were ready to face it together. The challenge ahead was not just about land or legal papers. It was about fairness, respect, and standing up for what was right. And for John and Maria, it was also about friendship, trust, and the courage to face the world side by side. The morning of the court hearing arrived, carrying with it a sense of tension and anticipation. John and Maria prepared themselves, each taking a moment to reflect on the journey that had brought them here. They had spent days gathering evidence, speaking with witnesses, and learning about the law. Now it was time to stand tall, to speak clearly, and to show the court the truth. As they rode toward the courthouse, John glanced at Maria. She seemed nervous, but there was also a spark of determination in her eyes. John smiled. "We've got this," he said quietly. Maria nodded, taking comfort in his presence. Together, they were ready to face the challenge, knowing that whatever the outcome, they had stood up for what was right and had done so together. The day of the court hearing arrived, and John Miller could feel the tension in the air even before he reached the courthouse. The sun was bright and hot over the small town, casting long shadows across the streets as people went about their daily routines. The courthouse was an old building, made of stone and wood, with tall windows that let in the morning light. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper, polished wood, and the faint dust of old floors. John and Maria stepped through the doors together, their footsteps echoing softly in the empty hallway. Maria's hands were clenched tightly, and John could feel her nervous energy. He gave her a reassuring glance. "We're ready," he said quietly. The courtroom was simple but formal. Wooden benches lined the sides, and a high judge's bench commanded attention at the front. A few townspeople had come to watch, including neighbors who supported Maria and a few curious onlookers. The company that had accused Maria of violating land rules had brought a lawyer, a tall man in a dark suit with a polished briefcase and a confident, almost arrogant air. He spread papers across the table in front of him and began speaking in a smooth, practiced voice. John and Maria took their seats together. John had spent nights preparing for this moment, and he had made sure that Maria understood what to expect. They had practiced how to answer questions, how to stay calm, and how to present the truth clearly. John whispered to Maria, "Remember honesty and confidence. We know the truth, and that is our strength." Maria nodded, taking a deep breath to steady herself. The lawyer for the company began by outlining his claims. He spoke about contracts, access roads, and alleged violations of local regulations. His voice was precise, sometimes sharp, and full of legal terms that sounded confusing. Maria listened quietly, trying not to let fear take over. John squeezed her hand under the table, silently reminding her that she was not alone. When it was John's turn to speak, he stood up slowly, feeling the eyes of the room upon him. He was not a lawyer, and he knew the company's lawyer was experienced and practiced. But John also knew something far more important. He knew Maria's character and the truth about her land. He spoke clearly and respectfully, outlining the facts as he knew them. He described Maria's long-standing ownership, her careful maintenance of the property, and the many ways she had respected the land and her neighbors. John also emphasized the human side of the story. He told the court about Maria's dedication to her family, her honesty, and her commitment to the community. He spoke about the small acts that showed her integrity, how she had helped neighbors, cared for animals, and respected the desert land for generations. John's words were simple but powerful, and they began to shift the attention of the courtroom. People could see the truth through his sincerity. The company's lawyer was quick to interrupt, questioning John's credibility and trying to suggest that he was biased because of his friendship with Maria. John remained calm. He answered each question honestly, explaining how he knew Maria and why he believed in her integrity. He never raised his voice or argued aggressively. Instead, he relied on facts, observations, and the support of the community members who had agreed to testify. Several neighbors were called to speak. They told stories about Maria, about how she had cared for the land, how she had followed local rules, and how she had helped those around her. Each testimony added weight to John's statements. The court listened carefully, and slowly the narrative of the violator began to change. Maria was not a lawbreaker. She was a responsible, honest, and hardworking woman defending her rightful property. At one point, the company's lawyer attempted to intimidate John by presenting documents that seemed complicated and confusing. But John had anticipated this. He calmly explained each document, pointing out errors, misunderstandings, and inconsistencies. The judge listened carefully, nodding occasionally, and Maria felt a surge of hope. John's preparation, his calm demeanor, and his clear understanding of the land and the law were beginning to make a difference. As the hours passed, the tension in the courtroom grew. Maria could feel the weight of the moment, but John stayed by her side, offering quiet encouragement. "You're doing great," he whispered. "Just speak from the heart when it's your turn." When the judge asked Maria to speak, she took a deep breath and described her life on the land. She spoke about her family, the traditions she honored, and the respect she had always shown for the rules. Her voice was steady, and she looked directly at the judge, showing confidence she had not felt in weeks. John watched her closely, feeling a mix of pride and relief. He knew that this was not just about winning a legal battle. It was about standing up for what was right, about proving that courage and integrity could face even the most intimidating challenges. Maria's words, combined with the testimonies of neighbors and John's detailed explanations, painted a clear picture. Maria was a responsible landowner, unfairly accused by a distant company that had no understanding of her life or the community. The courtroom atmosphere began to change. The initial skepticism of some attendees shifted to respect and understanding. Even the judge, who had listened quietly and carefully throughout the hearing, seemed to appreciate the honesty and determination displayed by John and Maria. The lawyer for the company, sensing that his strategy was losing effect, tried one last time to challenge their evidence. But John remained steady, calmly addressing every point with logic, facts, and clarity. Throughout the hearing, John noticed small gestures from the audience, nods of agreement, murmurs of support, and the occasional glance of admiration. The community's support, even if subtle, reinforced the truth of what John and Maria were presenting. He realized that standing up for someone was not only about speaking in court, it was also about inspiring others to see justice and fairness clearly. By the end of the day, the courtroom was quiet. The judge took a moment to review the evidence and the testimonies, then asked both sides for final statements. John spoke simply but passionately. He reminded the court that this case was about more than contracts or technicalities. It was about a person's life, a community's respect, and the principle of fairness. He concluded by saying that Maria had always acted honestly and had cared for her land and neighbors with integrity. Maria added a few final words of gratitude and determination, thanking the court for hearing her side and expressing her hope for fairness. As the judge prepared to make a decision, John and Maria stepped outside for a brief moment to catch their breath. The sunlight felt warm on their faces, and the desert air carried a sense of calm after hours of tension. John turned to Maria and said softly, "No matter what happens, I'm proud of you. You've been brave today and you've shown the truth." Maria smiled, feeling a mix of nervousness and hope. "Thank you, John. I couldn't have done this without you," she replied. When they returned to the courtroom, the judge read the decision carefully. In clear, respectful words, the judge acknowledged that Maria had acted within her rights, that the company's claims were not supported by sufficient evidence, and that Maria was entitled to maintain control over her land. The courtroom filled with quiet murmurs and relieved sighs. Maria felt a wave of relief and gratitude, and John could see the joy and pride in her eyes. The victory was more than legal, it was symbolic. It showed that standing up for truth and fairness could overcome intimidation and misunderstanding. It reinforced the value of community, friendship, and courage. John and Maria's bond, already strong, had grown even stronger through this experience. They had faced fear, uncertainty, and the weight of an unfair accusation together, and they had emerged stronger. As they left the courthouse, a few neighbors approached them to offer congratulations and support. John smiled and shook hands, but he knew the real victory was the restoration of justice and the reaffirmation of integrity. Maria walked beside him, her steps lighter, her heart calmer, and her spirit stronger. The journey had been difficult, but it had also been empowering. That evening, back at the ranch, John and Maria sat quietly on the porch, watching the desert sunset. The sky was ablaze with colors, the wind carried the scent of dry earth, and the world felt peaceful again. Maria took a deep breath and said, "I feel like I can finally breathe again. Thank you, John, for standing by me." John smiled, knowing that their friendship and courage had made this possible. "We stood together," he said simply, "and that is something no one can take away." The events of that day became a story that the community would remember for years. It was a tale of honesty, courage, and the importance of standing up for what is right. John and Maria had not only defended a piece of land, they had defended justice, friendship, and the values that made their community strong. And as the stars appeared over the desert night, the two friends sat quietly, reflecting on what they had learned. They knew that life would continue to bring challenges, but they also knew that together they could face anything. The courtroom had tested their courage, but it had also shown them the power of truth, integrity, and unwavering support for one another. In the quiet desert night, they felt a sense of peace, knowing that they had done what was right and that justice had been served. After the courtroom victory, life for John Miller and Maria Yazzie did not immediately return to complete calm. While the judge had ruled in Maria's favor, the echoes of the case continued to ripple through the small community. Word of John's courage and Maria's perseverance spread quickly, and people in town began to react in different ways. Some were inspired, some were skeptical, and a few still whispered doubts. For John and Maria, this period became a test not just of legal success, but of community trust, understanding, and the strength of their friendship. The day after the ruling, John and Maria walked together through the small streets of their town. The sun was warm, but the desert breeze carried a hint of coolness from the mountains. A few neighbors approached, offering congratulations and kind words. Some thanked John for standing up for Maria when many would have stayed silent. Others offered quiet smiles, acknowledging Maria's bravery in defending her land and her heritage. John and Maria felt a mix of pride and humility. They had not acted for recognition. They had acted out of friendship, justice, and fairness. Yet, seeing the positive response warmed their hearts and reminded them why they had chosen to stand together. However, not everyone welcomed the outcome. A few townspeople and distant acquaintances who had been close to the company expressed disappointment or disapproval. They questioned John's decision to intervene and wondered if taking sides in a legal matter was appropriate. John, however, remained unshaken. He understood that true courage often invited criticism, and he had already made peace with the fact that standing for what was right would not please everyone. Maria, too, found herself reflecting on the reactions around her. Some people now approached her with respect, while others avoided her gaze, unsure how to act. The courtroom had changed perceptions, but the social landscape was still shifting. Back on her property, Maria began to rebuild a sense of normalcy. She tended to her orchard, cared for her animals, and worked on strengthening the fences and irrigation systems. But this time, there was a newfound confidence in her actions. She knew she had defended not just her land, but her honor and her place in the community. John often joined her during these chores, helping to repair fences, check water levels, or simply sit and talk about the future. Their conversations were filled with reflections on the past challenges, lessons learned, and hope for what lay ahead. During this period, John and Maria also recognized the importance of sharing their story with the community. They wanted people to understand the truth, not just about the case, but about the values it represented: fairness, courage, and standing up for neighbors in need. John spoke at a small town meeting, emphasizing the lessons of the courtroom battle. He did not boast or exaggerate. He simply recounted the events, highlighting Maria's integrity and the need for support and understanding among neighbors. Maria, encouraged by John, also spoke about her experience, describing her fear, her determination, and the importance of friendship in facing difficult challenges. Their words had a powerful effect. Many townspeople were moved by their honesty and courage. People who had been uncertain began to show support in small but meaningful ways. Some helped with repairs on Maria's property, while others offered advice or assistance with everyday chores. Children in the town listened attentively to Maria's stories of the land, learning lessons about respect, tradition, and community responsibility. John and Maria realized that their experience was not just about a legal victory. It was about inspiring understanding and kindness in the wider community. Despite these positive developments, John and Maria remained aware of potential challenges. Legal disputes were never completely over the moment a ruling was made. The company could have appealed, or new issues could have arisen regarding property boundaries or local regulations. John continued to research, taking careful notes and consulting with officials to ensure that Maria's rights remained protected. Maria also stayed vigilant, understanding that her vigilance and proactive actions were crucial in maintaining the safety and security of her property. Together, they created a plan for managing the land and staying informed about any future developments. During these weeks, the bond between John and Maria deepened further. They shared meals together, often sitting on Maria's porch as the sun set, the desert sky painted in brilliant hues of red and gold. They discussed everything: the beauty of the land, the challenges of maintaining it, the lessons learned from the courtroom battle, and the hope they had for the future. Through these conversations, they realized that their friendship was built on trust, loyalty, and mutual respect. It had been tested in the most difficult circumstances, yet it had emerged stronger than ever. The experience also sparked conversations about fairness and justice within the community. Local leaders began to consider how disputes could be resolved more transparently and fairly. Schools included lessons about respect for neighbors, understanding different cultures, and standing up for what is right. Maria's story became a quiet inspiration for many, illustrating the importance of courage, patience, and integrity. John's willingness to stand by her side showed that one person's actions could influence and encourage an entire community. In the midst of all this, John and Maria also found time to enjoy the simple joys of life on the ranch. They rode horses through the dusty trails, checked on cattle, and watched sunsets together. These moments reminded them that life was more than struggles and challenges. It was also about beauty, peace, and shared experiences. They laughed when animals behaved unpredictably, shared stories about the past, and dreamed quietly about the future. These small joys strengthened their spirits and reinforced the importance of community, friendship, and mutual support. One day, a group of neighbors approached Maria with a request. They wanted to organize a small gathering to celebrate her victory and to recognize the lessons learned about fairness, courage, and community. Maria hesitated at first, feeling shy about public attention, but John encouraged her. "It's not about you," he said. "It's about the message this story sends. It's about teaching others that standing for what is right matters." Maria agreed, and together they planned a small but meaningful event. The gathering brought people together in a way that had not happened before. Neighbors shared food, stories, and laughter. They discussed the importance of respect, honesty, and support for one another. Children listened attentively to Maria's tales about the land and the challenges she had faced. John quietly observed, feeling proud not just of the legal victory, but of the way the community had come together. It was a moment of connection, a reminder that courage and integrity could inspire hope and unity. Even with these celebrations, John and Maria remained grounded. They understood that life would continue to present challenges, but they also knew that the lessons of courage, fairness, and friendship would guide them through whatever came next. They continued to care for the land, nurture the animals, and maintain the fences and fields. They stayed vigilant, aware that the safety of the property and the well-being of the community required ongoing effort. And they continued to support each other, knowing that their bond was a source of strength in a world that could sometimes be uncertain and challenging. As weeks turned into months, John and Maria saw the long-term effects of their actions. The town became more aware of fairness and justice, and more people spoke up for those who needed support. The community began to understand that standing up for one person was also standing up for shared values and collective well-being. John and Maria's friendship became a symbol of courage, loyalty, and integrity, proof that true bonds could withstand challenges and inspire others. Even in quiet moments, when the work on the ranch was done and the sun dipped below the horizon, John and Maria reflected on what they had accomplished. They had faced fear, uncertainty, and opposition together. They had defended truth and justice. And they had learned the power of friendship, trust, and unwavering support. These lessons were as important as any legal victory. They were lessons for life. In the evenings, as the desert sky turned brilliant shades of purple and gold, John and Maria would sit on the porch, sipping tea or sharing a simple meal. They watched the stars appear, one by one, and felt a deep sense of peace. The land, the community, and their friendship had all been tested, and they had come through stronger and more connected than ever. They knew that challenges would continue, but they also knew that they had the courage, wisdom, and support to face whatever came next. In this period of reflection and community rebuilding, John and Maria understood the real meaning of standing up for someone. It was not just about defending land or winning a court case. It was about inspiring fairness, courage, and understanding in everyone around them. And in doing so, they discovered the lasting impact that loyalty, integrity, and friendship could have on a small town, a community, and the lives of those who chose to act with courage. The story of the rancher and his Apache neighbor became more than a tale of legal victory. It became a story of hope, resilience, and the power of standing together. John and Maria had faced one of the greatest challenges of their lives, but they had done it with honesty, bravery, and unwavering friendship. Their example would live on, a reminder to everyone that doing the right thing, even when it is difficult, can create lasting change and strengthen the bonds of community. After months of uncertainty, hard work, and quiet determination, life finally settled into a new rhythm for John Miller and Maria Yazzie. The court had ruled in Maria's favor, the community had begun to understand the importance of fairness, and the small town had grown closer through the lessons of justice and courage. But more than legal victory or public recognition, John and Maria discovered something far more lasting: the strength of their friendship, the power of trust, and the meaning of standing for one another. In the early morning, John rose before the sun, as he always did. The desert air was crisp and quiet, carrying the familiar scent of earth and grass. He walked the familiar paths of his ranch, checking fences, inspecting water sources, and watching the cattle graze calmly in the distance. Each step reminded him of the journey that had brought them here. The nights spent preparing for court, the hours listening to Maria's fears, the careful collection of evidence, and the countless conversations that had strengthened their resolve. John had always believed in hard work and honesty, but now he understood the deeper value of courage and loyalty. Maria, too, had found a new sense of confidence. She moved through her property with purpose and calm, tending the orchard, feeding her animals, and repairing fences with quiet determination. The legal battle had been frightening, but it had also shown her that fear could be faced and overcome. She had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. And she had learned that true friendship was a gift, a support that could lift one through the most challenging times. Neighbors began visiting more often, bringing small gifts or offering help with tasks around Maria's property. Some had been inspired by the story of the courtroom battle and wanted to show their support in simple, meaningful ways. John and Maria welcomed their neighbors warmly, sharing meals, exchanging stories, and building stronger bonds. The community had begun to see that fairness, honesty, and courage were values worth embracing, and that standing together made everyone stronger. One afternoon, a group of townspeople approached John and Maria with a special request. They wanted to honor the lessons learned from the legal battle by planting a small community garden on public land, a place where everyone could contribute, learn, and grow together. Maria hesitated at first, feeling shy about being the center of attention, but John gently encouraged her. "It's not about being the center," he said. "It's about creating something that teaches everyone about courage, fairness, and working together." Maria agreed, and together with their neighbors, they helped prepare the garden, planting seeds, watering young plants, and arranging the area with care. The garden became a symbol of community unity and shared values. Children came to learn about the land and the importance of caring for it. Adults shared stories about justice, friendship, and helping those in need. John and Maria watched with quiet pride as their small actions inspired a ripple effect throughout the town. What had begun as a legal battle had grown into a lesson about life, integrity, and the power of standing up for what is right. Even as the community flourished, John and Maria continued their own work on the land. They repaired fences that had been damaged by storms, planted new trees in the orchard, and tended to their animals with care. But now, there was a deeper sense of purpose in their work. Every action they took, every task they completed was a reflection of their values: hard work, honesty, and care for the land and for each other. They had learned that life was not just about personal success, but about the impact one could have on others, the inspiration one could provide, and the bonds one could strengthen. One evening, after a long day of work, John and Maria sat together on the porch of her small wooden house, watching the sun set over the desert. The sky glowed with brilliant shades of orange, pink, and purple, and the wind carried the soft scent of dry grass and earth. They shared a simple meal of bread, cheese, and fresh vegetables from Maria's garden. In the quiet moments between bites, they reflected on the journey that had brought them here. "I still can't believe how far we've come," Maria said softly. "I was so afraid before the court case. I didn't know if I could face all of that." John nodded. "I know," he replied, "but you were braver than you realized. You faced fear and you stayed true to yourself." "That's something to be proud of." Maria smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the evening sun. "And you stood by me," she said. "You believed in me even when things seemed impossible. I will never forget that." John looked out at the desert, his thoughts quiet but steady. "That's what friendship is for," he said. "We stand for each other through good times and bad. That's how we make a difference, not just for ourselves but for everyone around us." Maria nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. They sat together in silence, watching as the colors of the sky deepened and the first stars began to twinkle above. The moment was peaceful, reflective, and full of meaning. The story of John and Maria soon became well known in the surrounding area. People admired their courage, their honesty, and the way they had stood together in the face of fear and uncertainty. John, who had always been a quiet, hardworking rancher, became a symbol of loyalty and moral strength. Maria, who had faced threats to her land and livelihood, became a symbol of resilience, courage, and the power of believing in oneself. Together, they showed the world that friendship, integrity, and fairness were values worth fighting for, no matter the obstacles. Months passed, and life on the ranch continued. Seasons changed, bringing scorching summers, chilly winters, and the beauty of spring growth. John and Maria worked alongside each other, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. They shared stories, laughter, and the quiet satisfaction of a day's work well done. The land thrived under their care, and the community thrived under the lessons they had shared. Their friendship, tested and proven, became a source of strength for them and an example for those around them. In quiet moments, John reflected on the lessons he had learned through the journey. He understood that courage was not about being fearless, but about standing for what is right, even when it is difficult. He understood that loyalty and trust could inspire change and strengthen communities. And he understood that friendship was one of the most powerful forces in life, a bond that could sustain people through fear, uncertainty, and challenge. Maria, too, reflected on her experiences. She realized that facing challenges had made her stronger, more confident, and more aware of her own abilities. She saw how important it was to have someone who believed in her, who stood by her without hesitation. She also saw the importance of sharing her experiences with others, teaching the next generation about courage, fairness, and respect for the land and for people. One bright morning, John and Maria stood together at the edge of the ranch, looking out over the land they had fought to protect. The fields stretched before them, the cattle grazed peacefully, and the desert mountains stood tall in the distance. John turned to Maria. "We did it," he said simply. "We stood for what was right and we made a difference." Maria smiled, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment. "Yes," she replied, "and we did it together." Their friendship, forged in the trials of life and strengthened in the face of challenges, became a lasting bond. They knew that life would continue to bring difficulties, but they also knew that they could face anything together. They had learned that standing for someone was more than an act of kindness. It was an act of courage, honor, and integrity. And they had shown their community that fairness, loyalty, and friendship were values that could inspire hope and change. As the sun set that evening, casting long shadows over the desert, John and Maria sat quietly on the porch. The sky glowed with rich colors and the first stars began to appear. They shared a quiet meal, talked about the day, and enjoyed the simple beauty of life on the ranch. In that moment, everything felt right. The land was safe, the community was stronger, and their friendship had been tested and proven unbreakable. John thought about the journey they had taken together, from the quiet days of ranch life to the tension of the courtroom, through the support of neighbors, and the lessons learned from fear and perseverance. He realized that the true victory was not just about legal success, but about the courage to stand for others, the strength of friendship, and the hope that honesty and integrity could inspire in a community. Maria, looking at the horizon, felt a deep sense of peace. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and opposition, and had come through stronger and more confident. She had learned that standing up for oneself and for what is right was never easy, but it was always worth it. And she had learned that friendship, trust, and loyalty were the greatest gifts one could receive, and the greatest tools to overcome challenges. As the night settled over the desert, the stars shone brightly above, reflecting the enduring hope, courage, and determination of two friends who had stood together when it mattered most. John and Maria knew that their story would live on, not just in the community but in the hearts of those who heard it. It was a story of friendship, bravery, and the power of standing for what is right. In the quiet desert under the vast sky, life went on. The land thrived, the animals grazed peacefully, and the community grew stronger. And through it all, John and Maria remained side by side, two friends bound not just by proximity, but by loyalty, courage, and the shared belief that standing for someone was the most important thing a person could ever do. The rancher and his Apache neighbor had faced fear, injustice, and uncertainty, and they had emerged victorious, not only in court but in life. And as the stars sparkled overhead, they knew that their story was far from over. It was a story of hope, friendship, and courage that would inspire generations to come.